Welcome to the Manufacturing Matters podcast with the Council of Industry. Join us as we bring you inspiring stories, interviews, and insights from across the Hudson Valley that will revolutionize the way you think about manufacturing. This podcast is proudly sponsored by PKF O'Connor Davies, a leading accounting and advisory firm dedicated to helping businesses thrive in the manufacturing sector. With their industry knowledge and strategic guidance, PKF O'Connor Davies ensures that manufacturers have the financial insights and support they need to achieve success.
In Buonomo, thank you for joining the Council of Industry podcast. We're super excited to have you here. Why don't we get started with just telling us a little bit about yourself, your role, and how you got to meet and integrate with the Council of Industry.
Great. Thanks, Jenny Ann. Pleasure to be here to talk to you this morning. My name is Vinny Buonomo. I'm a senior program manager and adjunct faculty here at RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology's Center for Quality and Applied Statistics, which is part of the College of Engineering. My role is to work with industry and deploying, continuous improvement methodologies and process improvement, along with teaching an undergrad and grad course around Lean Six Sigma fundamentals, which is a popular elective with many of our engineering and business students on the campus.
I would imagine. And so as long as I've been at the council, that your name is kind of anonymous with successful courses, and we're always trying to get on your calendar in advance. How did you come to work with Harold and the council?
Yeah, it's a long story. I've been blessed. I've been here for a long time and also been fortunate to work with the council and many of the local area community colleges. I think it's getting close to 25 years now.
Wow.
The person I have to credit with that is a fellow named Andrew Sillen, who was part of Dutchess Community College. I think Harold would probably remember him back in the early
I've heard
2000.
Good things.
Yeah, and we started with one class, and then sort of that's expanded, and so I've had an opportunity to work with certainly a lot of your members and then other organizations in the region, many of them in a sort of an open enrollment format, delivering content and topics that are of interest to the participants.
Yeah, that's great. And you mentioned the community college. We're really kind of fortunate to have those partnerships. And oftentimes there's workforce grants and funding that they try and secure and be able to offer this, at a discounted or a fraction of the rate that it would cost if a person was just trying to sign up for a class online. I'm curious in that also, have you found the format that we're using, which is, multiple different companies, but a handful of people maybe from one company? What are the pros and cons to that format?
Yeah, I think what I've seen is certainly not an expert. I think what you're doing down there is probably the most cost effective. It sort of leverages, what's available, also the ability to deliver courses when there isn't funding available and spread that cost across multiple companies. And I always find with this cohort training that there's hopefully not just learning from the instruction and the trainer, but from each other. Oftentimes they feel like they're, on an island by themselves. The reality is these problems are very common across different organizations in different sectors. And so they learn from each other and sort of go through that experience together. And I think that adds, a tremendous amount of richness to the course. The other thing, again, I'm not certainly an expert in the community colleges. I have engaged with a number of them, but what I really do appreciate with the Hudson Valley, from my perspective coming down, is how close the community colleges work together in unison. I don't think that's the case across the board, across New York State. Some of them are in a shell. Some of them are very territorial. Seems like turf war, where you guys, work together to sort of service the entire region, which I think also helps with effectively delivering these courses.
Yeah, we do consider ourselves to be fortunate, and we're on a few other statewide calls where we just hear, the struggles. Everyone, I think, personally, I believe everybody wants to work together and they want to be collaborative and they want to be regional. But when it gets to the rubber meets the road, it's hard and it's not an easy thing to do. We're fortunate because of the fact that we are a regional association. So we don't have the privilege of just partnering with one community college and calling it a day. We have and have to continue to build those relationships. And obviously, Harold has been really good at that for 35 years. So we get to continue that. But we are thankful because sometimes, they get to come to us and say, we'd like to partner and do this. And sometimes we get to go to them and say, we were really getting a lot of requests for this type of training. Is there any way that we can work together? And it is a win-win. So we're thankful for that. Now, you offer these types of courses, and we'll get into a little bit more of what they are in a second, but not just to manufacturers, but to other industries too. You even mentioned some of your business students. Can you just give, some examples of maybe what you're seeing that's the same regardless of industry, or like what seems to feel like a manufacturing specific trend?
Yeah, obviously a lot of the principles of Lean Six Sigmas are derived from, production and manufacturing. So, that's certainly relevant to that group. But, what I've seen over the years, probably over the last, decade or so is, sort of these principles being applied in all sectors. It's taken a while and, many different factors contributing to that. I think some of the same pressures that manufacturers have experienced for a long period of time have now surfaced in other industries. I also think there's been some defection and movement of personnel between sectors, and that also has added to the receptivity of these concepts. So, sectors like healthcare, and service, logistics, education, we have to be honest with ourselves, even in, higher ed and secondary ed, school districts, they too are, have limited budgeted staff constraints and still have mandates that they need to meet. Finance industries, banking, credit unions, government sectors, not-for-profits. Again, and the reason it sort of works or is applicable is it's all process centered. So getting the students or getting the folks from the organization to think about not just the issue they're trying to resolve or the problem at hand, but what's the process that's kind of generating those undesirable outputs, whether it be the hiring process, the onboarding payroll process, IT process. And then start to really understand what's currently going on so you can understand what's contributing to the problem and hopefully put in, some measures and interventions that are going to be effective and sustainable.
Yeah. I was actually first introduced to these principles. I worked in real estate for my early career. I worked for corporate relocation. And I remember, I might have been 23. And I might have even been younger than 23, but it felt like that. And we were sent to a seminar in the city for the day. And we went, I think it was 3 days, and we got to work through all these things. And ironically, I was very excited about what we were doing and how we could bring some of those things back. But I was really connected to my personal life, where I was just like, I think I can, fix this type of thing that keeps showing up because I didn't get back to the root of it. And I didn't create a system to prevent those things. So it's an interesting overlap that, it does apply. Almost no matter what you're doing, you could probably find an efficiency.
Good point. Yeah, many of the students will come back and, tell me that, not only are they trying to apply it at work, but, obviously their own personal lives, whether that's, being more organized with some visual controls, whether that's, workplace organization, the time they're spending searching for various items, whether it's the latest, project they're working on at home or the spring cleanup they're trying to do. And so there's some of these things on multiple levels can certainly be effective, at home, just as they are in the workplace.
Yeah, it's always worth it. It's a little bit of upfront work and digging in. One of our members once gave me an expression. I know that she didn't make this up because it came from her company, but she was talking about being trained right from the beginning, from her first job at, blame the process, not the person.
Yeah.
So, I can see that being a value even for the professional skills, the soft skills, the culture, the workplace, even more so than just we can do this more efficiently and these products can get out more and we can cut back on waste, but the bigger ripple effect.
Yeah. Yeah. And you read all these, self-help books and stuff.
Yeah.
And the same principle applies. A lot of times folks are blame themselves as being unable to acquire certain habits, but most of
Yeah.
those sort of stress. What are you doing? What's the environment? What's the system that you fall under? And those things can contribute to whether you're able to sustain that individual change. And so even at the organizational level, when we're talking about hundreds of folks, the same principles apply.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So when you think of someone who is maybe not master level, but who's really mindful as a practitioner of this, how would you describe that person? I have a follow-up question, but I want to just leave that open-ended for you.
Yeah, I do think, some folks are more inclined than others to, like this kind of work, to drive this kind of change. But I
Yeah.
don't think anybody is exempt from that. So,
Right.
again, it's endless learning. So, I always say in all of the classes, no one's an expert, including myself. We should all
Right.
be lifelong learners. And
Yeah.
every organization, every situation, every project, every process is different. And so you can always learn and take something away from that, nuances from each of them, and the way it needed to be customized in order for that to be effective. And so I certainly there's various levels of education. I think a lot of folks underestimate their own current level of understanding. If
Mm.
they're working, they've probably been exposed to some of this. Maybe they've never received formal training, and that's where I
Right.
think some of the classes that you put on can be helpful in some cases where they've kind of been exposed to it, but they maybe don't understand the why behind it as to
Yeah.
what the reason is. I see the same thing with my academic students. Many of them are bright students, but oftentimes they'll go on co-op, which is a requirement for many of the programs here, a year and a half, and they'll get exposed to a lot of these techniques. And then one of the reasons they end up taking my elective is they want to get a more sort of formal education on this, either encouraged by their co-workers or their boss, or their own professional development, to kind of get an understanding of why this is happening, or connect the dots between what they saw,
Yeah.
where there may be some potential improvements. And that's a lot of the homework, quite frankly, I give them, is
Right.
sort of reflecting on their own experiences. So with the students we see in the classes through the council, many of them have seen it at some level, and a sort of introductory may work. And then there's a progression in terms of, hey, I like this, I need more, I want to take a more active role. Hopefully the organizations are willing to support them in developing them as continuous improvement resources and agents for their organizations.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think sometimes even that we'll talk about this, the overview, but just having the words to articulate it. I mean, I mentioned being exposed to this, many years ago, but they're not words I use every day. They're not systems I use every day. They're not processes I use every day. So sitting and learning that there's a word for that thing I'm trying to do, or that conversation I'm trying to articulate to someone on the team. There's like an actual term for it. There's an actual process for it, and that might help even just give some confidence in there. My follow-up question to that was going to be, is it mindset or is it experience?
I think it's both, sort of a right defense there. Certainly there is some things are, in many cases, the folks will say is common sense, and that's right, although that's hard sometimes to do.
Yeah.
And some of them are counterintuitive. That may be a little bit different than what we're currently doing, or 180 degrees to what we're currently used to. And so it can challenge the current thinking, right? Like anything, a little bit of fear of the unknown, we
Yeah.
know what we have works. And so, it may not be worth the pain of the change, right? Unless it gets
Yeah.
significant enough. And so sometimes there's some apprehension there, as I said before, the unknown of making the changes. But understanding the root causes to the problems are going to be important. And over time, I think the mindset changes. And your comment earlier about language, I agree 100%. I tell all the students, regardless of the level of training they've gone through, there's a lot more people at your organization that were not part of this course. So
Right.
to expect them to immediately adapt to what you're trying to do is a little
Yeah.
unrealistic. So whether you accept the task or not, you have to put on your educator role. And as you introduce these tools, I'm not saying it has to be formal training, but certainly some orientation to what you're trying to do, and folks adapt at different time intervals. It's going to take some time for them to understand again the why behind what you're doing. Once they see some of the successes, then some of the guard comes down. I think some of
Yeah.
their mindset starts to change, and that applies at the front line with the workers on the floor, and certainly with top leadership as well.
Yeah. And I agree with what you were saying about being counterintuitive, because you think that maybe the issue, we see this with other training programs that we offer, is that they're busy. These everyone's busy. I mean, honestly, if you were employed today, if you were working in advanced manufacturing in New York State or in the Hudson Valley, it is because you have the opportunity to produce something that people want and that companies need, and the time is finite. You got to go, you got to hurry. But the intuition says, I don't have time to figure out the root cause.
Right.
I
Yeah.
just need to get this out the door today. I just need to do this one thing. But the counterintuitive piece is actually, maybe if you figured out why this keeps happening. And I think, many of our members, just like to your point, are doing that anyway. They
Yeah.
may not be doing it, systematically, and they may not be connecting all those dots, but they probably have a
Yeah.
bit of a foundation.
Yeah, good point. I mean, it's kind of the Band-Aid or whack-a-mole kind of concept where you're just trying to get by. It's the immediate issue that needs to be resolved, get by, and then again the reoccurring problems. One of the things, coming back to some of the training that we've done and offered, we do call it training, but many of them, what I try to do is more of a workshop. It take advantage of the time that these folks have together, and I know a lot of times, even with your pricing, you encourage multiples from
Yes.
individuals to attend. And certainly, individuals are welcomed, but it's a little easier. It's helpful to have, 2, 3, 4, 5 individuals from the same company. I know that's a bit of a time commitment, but then you're starting to develop those troops. And then in the course, even though we're training, we're also having them quickly apply this stuff so that they become better resources when they go back to be able to implement some of these changes at the organization, and don't feel like a lone ranger, with the only one who's heard the message. And then again, because of that time restrictions, we kind of try to utilize the class time to have those healthy discussions that need to happen from those cross-functional teams when we can in the course.
Yeah. One of the examples I've used in the past about just culture and change is, if you have, I'm not a baker, not even a cook, none of those things, but I've seen it on TV. So if you are trying to change the color of the icing for the cake, and you start with the base frosting, and you put just one drop of red in your base frosting, you don't get red. You don't get pink. You really just get the same base frosting, and do that enough and it'll start to change. But sometimes a company might say, we'll just send this one person to test it out. And that's a great idea. And why not get your foot in the door? But that one person's likelihood of coming back and changing the color of the frosting is hard. But some of our members, and you could probably even speak to this more than I could for 25 years of this, they might start out with, I'll send 2 people, and then it gets to the point where they're going to send 4 people every time it's offered. And now, by year 6 or 7, 30 to 50% of their team understands the principles, and maybe they come back for the advanced training and they go through a different workshop. But it takes time.
Yeah, that's a great point. And one of the things that I think, is very helpful in your region is, you do provide a schedule and a cadence that, folks can take advantage of. Many of the companies, small and medium, it would be hard for them to, take a big chunk of their workforce through a training all at once, kind of drink from the fire hose. It's better to sort of, do that over time. And with each group, leadership kind of knows what to expect, also knows what's being covered, and can take advantage of the course. And that was a lot of the dialogues that I know the council has with their members. And when I have opportunities to chat, with organizations that might be on the fence considering the course, kind of say, okay, here's how the course works. What do you currently have? How can this be a win-win? How can you take advantage of, sending resources? But you're right, doing this over time, it's not a one-time effort. I always say continually improve the continuous improvement process. Your customers are going to change, your product mixes are going to change, your personnel are going to change. So I've done training with organizations where I have trained all 100, 200, but and within a year or two, some of those folks are not there anymore. They've hired some new ones, and so they slip through the crack. And so to have a maintenance process in place, to have a basic level of understanding from everyone, whether it's part of embedded in their orientation or embedded in maybe their first year employed. And then, again, for the folks that express an interest or a passion, and as you try to evolve, try to develop, more dedicated resources to some of this effort.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been talking kind of high level about the different types of programs that you're offering and the continuous improvement, but let's dig in a little bit. So
Sure.
for someone who's maybe completely unfamiliar, we can do that little high level, but also for a company who's thinking maybe, but I don't even know where to begin, or that sounds like a big undertaking. Can you just tell us a little bit about the programs that we're doing together and what you offer?
Yeah. So we've got a number of different programs. We'll sort of start at the sort of basic level. We offer sort of a 1-day overview class, which covers many of the basic tools. It sort of covers the make, process, define, measure, analyze, improve, and control, and stresses a lot of the 9 forms of waste that exist in many processes. Oftentimes there's exercises or simulation built into that to give folks sort of a hands-on approach in a fun setting with some competitive juices flowing in terms of trying to apply some of these principles, and then relate what they saw in the class to what might be happening in their own organization, whether it's around cell design or whether it's around material handling or replenishment systems that they have, and what's working and what's not. And one of the things that I stress with all of the companies is they've been around, many of them, for a long time, so they're certainly doing something right. And so I think the message to all of them is not necessarily to scrap what they're doing and replace it with Six Sigma, but it's really about how can we augment what we have and have Lean Six Sigma and this continuous improvement approach maybe help us where there may be opportunities in the organization. From there, go ahead.
So real quick on that one. So that is, the workshop that we're calling it is just a lean overview.
Yep.
And that with a simulation, I know you had mentioned to be able to put that in, and we did that this past spring, and
we did.
Record numbers, I think, is a reasonable thing to say. We'll probably do better with capping that, but we have one of those coming up in the fall. We can put the link into the calendar. I believe it's the 28th. But that, might be something people would reach out about. In that case, who's the ideal customer? Who's the ideal person for that, or the ideal company?
Again, I don't know that I wouldn't limit the thinking to specific individuals. Certainly, shop floor workers, but supervisors and managers and engineers and leadership. I don't think there's any prereq particularly with the overview class. And again, what I see is oftentimes some of the benefits of these classes is getting that cross-functional representation and at all levels, right? So that they can, because they're all seeing it from their own lens. And there are a lot of times, I can't tell you how many times it's happened in dialogue that, I didn't know that's why we did this or what we're doing. And so they may not be privy to that information. And so it's an opportunity for them to share those experiences. So I really, it would be anyone who wants basic,
just kind of an interest in that. I think that we did get a nice cross section.
We did.
Across the board, and I agree. They learn so much from one another. Somebody told me after a yellow belt presentation, and you can go a little bit more into that. They mentioned that listening to another group work on their project in an area that they're not familiar with. So I think whatever it was, they were in production and this was like a customer service issue.
Yeah.
And they just sort of said, "Gee, I never really realized how much was going into that process." And they just went back to their customer service team and said, "Oh man,
Yeah.
I have a different level of empathy for you right now." So
Yeah.
why don't you talk a little bit about yellow belts and
Yeah.
how that intersects?
Yeah, that one's sort of again the next level of training in our program. It's 3 days, and typically we're doing it on site in the area at one of the community colleges. It's 3 consecutive days, and the emphasis there, really the main objective is develop productive team players for continuous improvement activities. So we've decided to stress certain basic problem solving tools, again under the umbrella of define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. But half of the time, teams from the organization are working on a process that is relevant to them.
Yeah.
So whether they come with that problem or process they want to study, or we quickly kind of identify that early on in the course. And I can tell you, and based on your earlier comment with the feedback is very favorable, and the content is good. Hopefully the instruction is good, but really it's again giving them the opportunity to work through it. And then to your point, there's sometimes apprehension about I'm in manufacturing, and these guys are in the credit union, or these guys are in service. But then there's this appreciation how the same process can be applied and slightly modified and adapted to, oh wow, this is a little bit more useful than I originally thought, or kind of eliminates or starts to reduce the amount of restriction or myths around the approach. And again, it all comes down to process. A lot of times people say, well, we don't have a process, it's not written. Well, you do, right? I mean, somehow you get the work done.
Right.
It
might not be written down, but you're doing it.
You may not have a checklist to help you do it, but in the end, you do deliver a product or service. It may not necessarily take the most direct path. So giving them time to map that process, to understand where there are bottlenecks, what the potential causes are. And that all leads up to, presentation at the end from these teams. And for, it's easy for some. I know it seems scary, but really the reality is, if they did the work over the 3 days, it's a pretty easy delivery. And so we invite leadership and management to attend those presentations at the end of the third day if they can, and give them notification, or at least maybe even management representation from the process being studied. And the deliverable at the end is, here's the work that was done, here's what we think are the next steps. Of course, some of that has to be refined. Some of the organizations take advantage of this, springboard of the class to kind of move forward. They might assign it to one individual to continue to move forward with it, or they might keep the team intact, or they might sort of transfer it over to someone else to continue to investigate, but really leverage the work that was done by the team to continue the momentum that was started from the process that was studied in the course.
Yeah. Something I like about working with you, Vin, is that a lot of times the employer's not so sure, and you've always been very generous to say, like, let's brainstorm that out. Let's have that conversation. Here's what they're going to get out of it. And then I think from those conversations, occasionally, or pretty regularly, the employer or the department supervisor will send 2 or 3 people or 4 people with a bit of a project in mind. They come in and they're having some thought around it. So there's already some buy-in to just say, like, explore this, see what you guys can come up with over the next couple of days. So that I think is helpful too.
And that, I was just going to say, that certainly happens as they start sending more and more teams. They've had someone go through. Now they know kind of what the approach is. How do we take advantage of it? Now we'll have sort of a team centered around folks that work in that process, study that process, and then, know that there's a deliverable at the end, for leadership to sort of take advantage of, to show their support, but also, send a message that, the work that you did was not, wasteful. We're going to sort of leverage that work moving forward, And then, of course, as we progress, we're talking about, more time and more intense training. And so the Greenbelt is offering, we've offered through the council as well, Tends to be more on a, or the yellow belt might be maybe twice a year. The green belt seems to be maybe once every 2 years. Kind of depends on the interest.
Yeah.
in
It's a
the
bit of
region.
a commitment, right? It's a
Yeah.
longer term, although there is it's a virtual process. So
Yeah.
that's nice too.
Yeah, but it does require some time, up front, whether it's, selecting the individual. Of course, that individual could be a yellow belt. It doesn't have to be. So, but, it expands 4 months of training in 13 weeks. And so there's a time commitment there. And then there's not, in addition to additional tools, which we
Mhm.
didn't have time for in the yellow belt, many of the additional lean tools, many of the statistical tools that are part of the toolkit. They're required to, pass an exam at the end, and then there's a project that needs to be completed in order to earn certification. And often that project will continue, well beyond the course, and I'll be engaged with those individuals through the completion of those projects. So, there we're moving forward to not just sort of here's the next steps or what we think is going to fix it. You're going to be required to, follow it at the main structure, use a project charter, implement those changes, and then demonstrate sustainable results that are verified by, leadership or a project sponsor. And then there's, requirements on reports at the end. So it's certainly something that, many companies will consider if they're developing emerging leaders, in an organization, that plus maybe some other training around project management, change management, all the things that, are also part of your certification course that you offer at the council.
Yeah, absolutely. That is there's a lot of homework, right? This is just you kind of you gather a little bit of information, and then in the yellow belt you work on it in the room,
In
right?
the workshop, yeah.
Right, in the workshop. So with the green belt, you work on it for a couple of weeks, outside at your facility. You're making progress, reporting back, coming back, learning more principles, the same hands-on experience where you're actually doing the work and reporting back.
Yeah.
But it's bigger.
And there's toll gates for each of those phases that are required in those elements. And, that's where I think a lot of the practical experience also comes in, where things could look simple on the slide and then more difficult when you're trying to work with individuals and getting them to behavior. Some of the other factors that might play into the success of the project, and then so managing key stakeholders, which are going to be critical at all levels in the organization. So
that's really great. What would you say? This is maybe a two-part question too. What would you say are some of the misconceptions when people ask you about these programs or reasons why?
Yeah, one that comes to mind often you hear about, when you think about the lean, there's always this, fear of, reduction in workforce, or we're trying to find out where there's waste, and they, point the finger at people that we need to get rid of to be more efficient. But, that's not really reality. It's around processes, and now many organizations are struggling with how do we efficiently utilize what we have. And it's not, I think another misconception, sometimes early on is that these principles are meant to add more to your plate. Like, okay, what we're doing now, leadership is cracking the whip and asking us to do more, and the reality is many of them are doing the best they currently can, given the current constraints or limitations of the process. Once we change the process, we allow things to go faster. We allow employees to be more productive. And so then they realize for themselves, we're not really asking them to do more, faster without changing the process to support that. And so those are two of the things that sort of come up in different ways, along with all the change, the change that you see. And it's all around what are the benefits, right? Sometimes we don't first admit that there's a problem. That's be overcome. And then two, what do they get out of that? Is it a more organized workplace? Is it reduced time searching? Is it higher productivity? Is it higher quality? Is it a more safe environment? Is it higher customer satisfaction, right? The why behind that, for them to just sort of do things without understanding, it's going to be very limiting or very short-term thinking.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, you kind of talked a little bit about change. I'm curious what you're seeing ahead, just some trends. I know you had mentioned that you need to be continuously improving your continuous improvement.
Yeah.
What are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, aside from the deployment in all the different sectors, the whole, AI world and stuff like that's coming. And it, certainly it's evolved more recently than in the past, but it's been around for a while. Many of the processes are being automated. And, again, sometimes there's this sort of misconception that, if we automate, we will fix this issue. But, if the process is, consists of a lot of waste, then, there are also some risks in automating that process where errors can happen a lot more faster than, originally thought. But certainly there's a place, and there's certainly manual work that's being transitioned.
Yeah.
That's been in place for a while, in the production environment and manufacturing. Now we're starting to see that in, the transactional world as well. So there's certainly a place to take advantage of that, to augment. Don't know that it's going to replace the people in our lifetimes, but I can't predict the future there.
No, then this podcast wouldn't be free if you had those answers.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I see what you're saying about that. And I really didn't give that much thought that if you automate a bad process, you're just gonna, make your waste faster.
Yeah, it'll release less
in a larger volume capacity. You're not necessarily fixing that.
Dangerous, right? It's optimizing, and then obviously there are places where you need to automate or, procure equipment or go for those bigger cost items, when it's appropriate. So certainly not saying it doesn't make sense, but let's do the most with what we have, and then you get to the point where you've exhausted the current capacity, and now we need to sort of think about additional capacity.
Yeah, that's great. Before we wrap up, I wanted to know, your background. How did you, end up here and doing this?
Yeah, it's a long story. When I'm sort of approaching this month is 30 years for me here at RIT. So
wow.
The gray hairs, and I joke, sometimes you get signs sometimes when you're in classes, and a student will come up to you and say, "You taught my mom." And I'm like, okay, wow, okay, thanks for
great.
that.
Okay, good.
I said hi. But,
time flies.
So I started here at RIT with a group that was traditional outreach with industrial and manufacturing engineering around, productivity, assessments, ergonomics, facility planning, quality management systems and standards and so forth. And then I got an opportunity to work with a group primarily focused in on lean and learn to sort of facilitate and train around, Kaizen events and focus improvement events and projects that are done in a small, short time frame. And then over the last 20 years, I've been part of, the Center for Quality and Applied Statistics, where I work closely with coworkers here to fully integrate the Lean Six Sigma approach. And do it in a way that's, tailored to the various sectors. But as I said before, given that time frame, certainly learned from a lot of intelligent individuals, learned from a lot of folks in industry, but continue to learn because, the students and industry folks will, again, all continually show you things that you haven't seen before and approaches, ways they've adapted things to make it work for their environment. So again, the message for the organizations is nothing's black or white, nothing's binary. Everything is kind of flexible and moldable to make it work for, your particular environment. I do want also to a small plug for a couple articles that I got a chance to write for the council. One in 2014, Lean Six Sigma for All, which talks about a lot of the things we just talked about how it's expanded to other non-traditional sectors, like we talked about government, healthcare, education, etc. So your members may find a value in looking at that. And then in the fall of 2019, wrote another article talking about Lean Six Sigma principles and delivering effective changes to companies in the Hudson Valley. And again, stressing that DMAIC approach, also talking about the importance of project selection. I mean, we don't have endless resources. So,
Right.
What's a good way to think about, important things that need to be worked on, and prioritizing them. The importance of a project charter, which again, like you said early on, does involve some planning, but in the end saves us time. And then also some, feedbacks and success from, and stories from some of the area companies in there. So hopefully
actually we can link that, and then maybe revisit another version, another edit, another article in the future. That'd be fun.
All right. Thanks.
All right, so that's good. So that's a good point them in the right direction. I guess my final kind of questions are just like, what advice do you have? Well, actually, I'm going to change gears before you tell me that. If you hear a trend that happens pretty regularly, and you did in fact have a magic wand, and for the record, I don't think you'd waste it on this. If you had a magic wand, I think you'd do it for something else a little bit cooler. But if you did, what would be something that you would fix in the processes that you hear from manufacturers?
I guess I would say off the top here would be, to have employees that are open-minded. And I know that's hard in some cases. Most are, honestly. I mean, like I said, I'm just basing it on the thousands of individuals that I've had a chance to stand in front of. And I think over time, most of them are. Some certainly, in the beginning might be closed, and it might be, again, a bad experience they had. And so you're having to overcome, or false starts that have occurred either at the current organization or previous organization. So you have to overcome those, and those are some challenges, but at least be receptive and be engaged. And over time, they become, better advocates. They become good influencers for the changes that you want. It's certainly easier to work with, folks that are open-minded and receptive to learning. But when I say learning, it's not like just sit there and listen. It's to be engaged, ask the questions, to share their experiences, good or bad, and learn, like we said, from each other, so that you're in a position to, go back to the organization and drive effective change that's recognized by the organization, and ultimately leads to business success, which is, the goal for many of them.
Yeah, I love that. I also think we sometimes think about that on both ends. So, if you find an employee who is narrow in their thoughts, sometimes you find an employer who created an environment to be narrow in your thoughts, not intentionally, but, you for those same reasons. And I'd also add that, my personal experiences, I don't think anybody gets up on their very first day of their very first job and says, I plan on being awful and doing you know what I mean? I don't think even as generations change and work value shifts, I don't think people are getting up with the intention of doing bad or the least. But I think you do, sometimes they try and implement a new idea, and they think they have a good change, and someone shuts it down, and then slowly that just chips away, and you become less and less open-minded.
Right.
And it's harder to do, which is why programs like this can have that systemic change over the course of time. It can chip away at that if you do what you say you're going to do, and follow through on those pieces.
Yeah, learn, like we said, learn from others. But you're absolutely right. But that newness, I love your comment on the new employee, because there's that element of that we want to keep alive. I know over time you lose that, but when you get into a lot of these process improvement projects, you do want to try to look at things from a new lens, start to question, ask the questions, be curious. That element, and sometimes we get that from folks that are from the same organization, but not involved in that process. So they don't have those biases, and they're starting to, does step 2 absolutely have to happen after step 1? Could we do 3 before 2? Some of the things that, again, it's so habitual, nobody's ever spent the time or even questioned that. So that curiosity, that open-mindedness, that engagement, is going to be helpful. And I do think the classes help, first eliminate some of the distractions. Although I know
Mhm.
now everybody's kind of connected with their cell phone, but at least
Yeah.
removes them from the day to day, temporarily, to be able to concentrate, listen to the content, apply it, and then look at things with a fresh set of eyes that, hopefully will aid the organization with this, mindset moving forward.
Yeah, I love that. Well, Vin, thank you so much for taking the time. We always love having you present and hold these workshops. We definitely have some things coming up. We'll make sure that we link it in the calendar and try and help connect that. Thank you again for doing this.
Thank you, Joanne, and thanks for the council for having me.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Manufacturing Matters, brought to you by the Council of Industry and sponsored by PKF O'Connor Davies, accountants and advisors who understand the unique challenges and opportunities in the manufacturing sector. We hope you gained valuable insights and inspiration from today's discussion. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to our podcast and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform.